This is our white build. We put it together last week on the channel, and not only is it enormously powerful, kind of impractical, very expensive, it's also very large. Now, granted, it needs to be this big to house some of its more impressive components, but size isn't always everything. So today what I decided to do was go in the complete opposite direction. We're gonna build the world's smallest gaming PC, and every single component that we're going to use in today's build is behind this tower, including the case. Let's get to work. Need a Windows or Office key but don't want to pay retail? MMORC.com has all the best deals and a sweet discount for BPS Customs viewers. Just head over to the site linked below and enter code BAN35 for 35% off your order total, meaning you could snag Windows 10 Home for under 10 bucks. Fill out your email and place your order, and then click the extract code button at the top of the page. From there, it's as easy as heading to your Windows activation settings and inputting your shiny new key. For more information, head to MMORC.com or check out the links below. Just before we get started here, guys, remember that I am a one-man operation here at BPS Customs. I do these builds here on the channel every single week, and we try to visit different price points, different form factors, different performance targets, and anything else that you guys might want to see. So if you want to keep up with all the builds I'm doing here on the channel, please remember to get subscribed down below, hit that little like button and the notification icon if you want to see more of this kind of content. So this is it, guys. These are the components we're going to use today in the world's smallest gaming PC. Now, I guess I say that and take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure that there are plenty of PCs out there that can technically play games that might end up being smaller than this one. But to be honest, the inspiration for this build was Intel's new NUC. Now, it comes in a box that's basically the same size as this. Now, I bought this case on AliExpress, I don't know, it's probably 2 months ago now, and it just arrived recently. It doesn't have a proper name. The name on the website is PC Gamer Case ITX Mini Case HTPC Safe Cabinet All Aluminum for Graphics Card. So, yeah. Total volume of this case is only 3.9 liters, and it fits a discrete GPU in it. We are going to have to use a small one, which is why we have this on the table right here. We'll talk about this in a second. But other than that, it uses desktop class components. So we're going to use a mini ITX motherboard. We're going to use regular memory. We don't need SODIMMs. We could use regular storage. Obviously, the discrete graphics card. The power supply that we have to use is a little bit different, and that's what enables this case to be so small. But I'll put a link to this case down below in the video description if you guys want to check it out. And when you configure it, you could buy it, I think, in like a silver or a red. And you could also add on things like a riser cable, which you will need for a graphics card, and also a power supply. So let's talk about that power supply. Inside this box is our power supply, and this is what enables this case to be so small. This case was built around not an ATX power supply, not an SFX power supply, but what's called a 1U power supply. Now, 1U power supplies are typically reserved for server applications. But who's to say that they can't go in a normal PC, because they still do have all of the regular connections. This PSU is very small and slim and will fit along the bottom of our case. It's 500 watts. It still has all the connections we need for a discrete graphics card. And it's going to be really cool building with something that's totally different. Obviously, the rest of our hardware is going to need to be pretty miniature. So we're going with a mini ITX form factor. This is MSI's B450i Gaming Plus AC motherboard. You may have seen this in a couple other videos. I've done a couple other builds using this board. I haven't updated it yet to Ryzen 3000 support, which we will need to do for our processor. This is AMD's new Ryzen 3 3300X. AMD had sent this over to me a little while ago, and I haven't yet had a chance to use it or test it. So this is going to be a really neat application for a processor like this. Now, this isn't the most powerful CPU in the world. However, if we had something that was super power hungry, like a 3900X or something like that, we would never be able to cool it in a case like this because we have to use a low profile cooler. In this case, NOC 2 is NHL9i. Just a small correction here, guys. The cooler that we're actually going to be using is NOC 2 is NHL9A-AM4, not the L9i. I just pulled the wrong one off my shelf. The L9i is Intel specific. The L9A is the AM4 variant of the same cooler, still same low profile, height, and whatnot. Just the different name. The correct one is linked down below. Now, the L9i is sufficient for a lot of different applications, but once you get up into the higher core count chips, it does tend to suffer a little bit and can't really draw that heat away from the IHS, and you're unfortunately going to throttle as a result. But our 3300X is a 4-core CPU. It's going to have a decent boost clock on it that's going to allow us to game pretty well, and the NHL9i should be good at cooling it. So this should be a good combination for our very small case. Now, the case does have a good amount of ventilation on the top and on all of the sides. There's no glass window on here or anything like that. It's made strictly for as much possible airflow as you could get in a small enclosure like this. But just do keep in mind that because of the way this is configured, the GPU is going to sit directly above this downdraft cooler, likely blocking off some of the air. So I am curious to see how effective it's going to be in a case like this. But because we're using a lower powered part, I think, or at least I hope, that we'll be okay. Now, as far as GPU goes, this is Gigabyte's RTX 2060 mini card. It's a 1-fan card, and it's less than 7 inches long. So it should fit really well inside of the case. It's only 2 slots high, so that's the amount of space that we have allocated here for a GPU. And it's still an RTX 2060, so to be honest, we could probably game in 1440p if we want to. Now, I won't be doing that in our testing. We'll be keeping to 1080p, but I know for a fact that the 2060 can game just fine in plenty of titles at higher resolutions. So if you build this or something akin to this, I think that you would be fine if you wanted to game at 1440p, albeit obviously at a little bit lower frame rate. For memory, we do have to go with something super low profile, so what is better than the Corsair Vengeance LPX modules? These are industry standard at this point. Everybody knows these and loves them. They're super reliable, super compatible with basically every motherboard and every CPU on the market, and they don't take up any space in the case because they're basically as low as you could get. Now, for storage, as always, as a caveat with these builds, I do encourage you guys to choose the right storage for your particular needs. We're going with an XPG drive for this, and I'll link it down below in case you guys want to check it out. But this is a SX6000. It's a 512 gig NVMe SSD and should be plenty for what we're planning on doing here today. So that is what we're going to be working with here today, guys. Sorry to talk about it in kind of a rambling detail, but we got to put it all together so that we could see what kind of performance we get. And I am super interested to see how thermals work out, see what kind of frame rates we get in some of our games. So let's get to work. And we're probably not going to have too much sexy B-roll because the case is kind of enclosed like this, but we'll do what we can. And yeah, let's get to it. What a cool little project this is. I mean, when was the last time that you could say that you can palm your gaming system? I mean, this thing is so ridiculously compact and still extraordinarily functional. I ran a whole bunch of gaming tests as I normally do on our weekly builds here, and obviously here are the results. You're not going to get any real different performance than you would out of a normal RTX 2060 in a normal case. I was actually mistaken when I was originally talking about this build, and then I thought the GPU would be sandwiched on top of the CPU cooler, but as it turns out, the case is laid out in such a way that the CPU and the GPU are actually kind of divided on different chambers, different sides of the case. So the CPU is drawing air in from one side, the GPU is drawing air in from the other side. So they're actually both facing outward and they're both facing proper ventilation. So they actually, as a result, didn't even get that hot. Most of the time, both components were sitting somewhere in the mid 60s when gaming. Now, granted, if you were to put the CPU under a sustained load, like for video editing or something like that, I think clearly you might run into a little bit higher temperatures, but still mid 60s, even peaking up into the low 70s, that was the max that I saw. And boost clocks were sustained at like 4325 throughout all of our testing. They didn't really vary at all. So we weren't running into any thermal issues with either the CPU or the GPU here, which is kind of amazing. I will say that there are some quirks to this kind of a build. Number one, the power supply comes with an Asian plug. So I guess I'm fortunate that I have, a whole bunch of other power supply cables lying around, because the end that plugs into the power supply itself is actually standard. So if you have any other power supply cable, or even if you just buy one separately, you could use it with this. And even though the power supply is labeled for 220 volts, I didn't have any problem running it off of a regular American wall socket, which is 110. So that wasn't an issue, but I did have to have a separate cable. Also, this case comes with no screws, like none. I had to provide the screws to screw the motherboard into the standoffs. I had to provide the thumb screws to secure the GPU in. I had to provide the screws to secure the riser cable to the case itself. And I had to provide the screws to secure the power supply down below. So if you're not somebody that has a whole bunch of those screws lying around, you could get this case in and get all your components in and be ready to build it and not be able to. So that is something to take into consideration. Also, the build process, I guess as you would expect for a case that's just this small, not really easy. There's a whole bunch of ways that you can approach this, different orders that you can put your components in, and most of them are wrong. I discovered this when doing my build, and a lot of the footage that you guys saw in the build montage, I had to go back and undo just so that I could do things in the proper order. Number one, you need to install the riser cable to the motherboard prior to screwing down the motherboard. You need to hook the GPU into the riser before you screw the riser to the case. You need to install the power supply and route all of your cabling before you do any of that. This case is so restricted on space inside that there's just no room to maneuver, no room to get your hands around things, no room to run cables. So just be aware that, if you're going to do a build like this, you're going to run into some issues that you might not otherwise have encountered in a larger space, a larger case, larger enclosure, something that you may have done a million times before. Also, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but there's no IO shield on here. I don't know what happened to the IO shield that I have for this motherboard. It wasn't in the box and I couldn't find it in my office. It's somewhere around here, so I would assume that if you were to do a build like this, you would have an IO shield, but I don't really think that makes a big of a difference. One thing that does make a difference, though, is how loud this system is. Take a listen at idle to how this system sounds. No adjustments were made to volume here. Now, what you were listening to, if you guys couldn't tell, the GPU fan was not spinning. The system was at idle. There was no stress on any component. You were listening to the power supply fan. Now, when you first boot this system, when you first turn it on, that fan, that very tiny fan that ejects air out the back of the case, it's either spinning very slowly or not spinning at all. And the system was actually really quiet when I first booted it. And I thought, man, this is going to be great. But as I left it on for a minute or two, all of a sudden that fan kicks on and ramps up to 100 and does not let up. And things were just loud, just consistently loud no matter what I was doing. And even when I had a load on the CPU and GPU for, running games and whatnot, I couldn't even hear the GPU fan because of how loud the power supply fan is. So you kind of run into a situation where you're like, this is so small and cute, and you could throw it on a desk and put it anywhere, kind of hide it somewhere, maybe an HTPC or something like that. But then you have to take into consideration that it's just going to be so loud, and that noise is going to be so prevalent, that is this something that you're going to want in a living room? So even if this might be the perfect size, shape, and look that you want for an HTPC setup, something in a living room, or maybe even in a dorm where there's not a lot of space and you want a very compact system, you have to take into consideration that wherever you're putting this, you're going to hear it. So unfortunately, I don't know that I could recommend it for those kinds of applications. With that being said, there's really something that is just so cool about having a legit 1080p and even 1440p gaming PC that I could just do this with. This case is just so much smaller than any other system that I've ever built, including the NZXT H1, the Lee & Lee TU150. And it's just so unique looking that I really dig it. Despite the fact that it does have some flaws, the build process is a little tedious, the fan on the power supply is pretty loud, and you don't get any screws or the correct power supply cable. If we overlook that stuff, it's really a neat build and a neat project, and I'm glad that I did it. And I'm wondering what you guys think of a build this small. Is this something that you would actually use? Do you need something that's this small, or would you rather have a few more of the conveniences that come with a slightly larger case? I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this, but regardless, I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad I built it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, took something away from this video. And if you did, leave a like down below, leave a comment, something along those lines. I'd love to hear from you guys as always. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. As always, make sure you stay tuned for next week's video where we'll be doing another system build. Take care, guys, and see you next time.